In this video, we're going to look at investing in different ETFs or indexes and which is the best one. I'm not going to tell you which is the best one, but I am going to give you some data which is going to help you decide which is the best one for you, because we're going to look at overall performance, also some of the big declines in these indexes, just so that you're aware of what to expect in them. So if we just look at going back, all these ETFs have been in operation. So we're going to use the IVV for the S&P 500, the QQQ for the Nasdaq 100, and IWM for the Russell 2000. They've all been trading since at least mid-2000. So that's where our chart starts, because they've all been trading since then. And you can see some pretty big declines here way back in 2000. And after including that big decline, these are the ultimate percentage returns. So you can see fairly evenly matched across all these indices. IWM is the turquoise one here, so up 437% over that approximately 23 years or so. And the S&P 500 up 487%, and the Nasdaq 100 up 487%. On which one do we have here? S&P 500 425%. So fairly evenly matched, but we did have a huge decline back in 2000 in the Nasdaq 100. We'll look at the percentage declines in just a moment. But basically, if we go from the bottom, so going from about 20 years ago, there's a dramatic difference coming out of these lows here. So if we go back to, let's say, 2023 or 2003 or 2004, huge difference. The Nasdaq has really blown away the other indices after that major sell-off in 2000, 2001, 2002. And so that's very interesting. So we then want to look at, because obviously these big declines also play a role in whether you're going to invest in an ETF or not. So depending on exactly when you look at these ETFs, it can give you a very different perspective on their overall performance. So that's basically going back to mid-2000. And if we look at just the last 20 years or so, looking much different. So let's go from 2003 to 2024. Yeah, you see the difference. So let's zero in on some of these specifically. Let's look at the S&P 500 first. So I'm going to use IVV. Let's get rid of these other ones for now. I like to use logarithmic. It kind of scales everything percentage-wise and makes it a little easier, I view, to view it. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to filter for everything that's a 50% decline. And we see in 2000 that wasn't even enough. We didn't drop more than 50%. So let's change that to 40, just so we can see how much these big percentage declines were. So that 2000 big stock market crash, the S&P ultimately dropped 48%. In the 2008 financial crisis, we dropped 56%. Now we've also had some of these other smaller declines. Let's just filter for those. Let's go to about 25%. And the one I'm interested in here is how much did we drop in 2000? So we dropped 35%. 2020 we dropped 26%. So you can kind of keep those numbers in mind. Then let's go to QQQ. And again, let's just filter for those big declines. Let's look at the 50+%. And even then, you can see if we just filter for 50% plus moves, we have a double there. So we're going to filter that out. We have to go up to 80. And you can see that this ultimate decline from the top in 2000 to the bottom in 2002, the Nasdaq 100 dropped 84%. So a massive, massive, massive decline. And part of the reason why, we get kind of distorted numbers when we look, if we only look back 20 years the Nasdaq looked like it's performed phenomenally. If we go back 24 years, it's performed pretty much like anything else because it just declined so much more than the other indices. The Nasdaq 100 was about half of that decline. So here we can see in 2008, looking at about a 55% decline. Then let's just look at some of these more recent ones. 2020 dropped 30% and 37% in 2022. So some of these, definitely the 2000, 2001, 2002 decline much bigger. Some of these other ones similar to the S&P, and then 2022 a little bit bigger, as we can see. Right, 26% for the S&P 500 versus 37% for the Nasdaq 100. Let's go to IWM. Again, let's look at the 2000 crash first and the 2008 crash. Let's bump this up. So a 40% decline in 2000, 2001, 2002. So, much better than the Nasdaq, for example. 56% decline in 2008. 2020, pretty big decline, 44%. And then let's see how it did in more recently on that decline in 2022. Has about a 33% decline. So this just gives you some ideas on both volatility and the ultimate percentage move. So coming out of that 2000 bottom, the QQQ has had much bigger returns, but that's also partially because they sold off so ferociously in the 2000 bottom. So let's just add these all back on. And we can throw the percentages on there. And then you can see over different time frames, so going from about 2010, it has been, remember these are a little bit mixed up order now from the last chart we looked at. This is the QQQ in the candles here. IVV, which is the S&P 500, is the turquoise, and IWM is the orange. So you can see the QQQ over the last 14, 15 years has definitely outperformed. Let's look over let's go to about 2014, so the last 10 years. The Nasdaq once again has outperformed with the S&P 500 in second and IWM in third. Just continuing to go in here, and you can see that that order has generally stayed the same over about the last 20 years. It's been the QQQ has generally been the best performing index. The S&P has been second, and the Russell 2000 has been third. So we don't know if that's going to continue in the future, because once again, one of these indices could have a huge sell-off like what we did in 2000, which kind of mixes everything up. But it does give you a sense, if you're going to invest and buy and hold or whatever you're going to do with these indices, just to be aware of how they typically move, what their percentage returns are over different periods, how they stack up against each other, and then also ultimately when these big declines do happen, what have those declines been in the past, and it gives us a bit of a reference point for what may happen in the future. So that's how we compare the QQQ with the Nasdaq 100 with the S&P 500 and the Russell 2000.